Well, it's 10 o'clock, which means it's time for another Vinimark webinar. Now, for the last little while, we've been kicking off each new year with a panel of experts predicting consumer trends for the year ahead. But with news and social media cycles seemingly relentlessly on repeat over how Gen Z doesn't drink anymore and how at the end of February, dry January is still a hot topic, we thought, let's take a slightly different approach to our usual discussions. So rather than drawing on media topics and sentiment-based predictions, we want to look at hard market data. So we're going to draw insights from this data. And the first thing we're going to do is answer a very worrying question, which I've already alluded to, and that is, has the world fallen out of love with wine, as social media would have us believe? Secondly, instead of looking at consumer trends, we want to take a deep dive into business trends. We want to analyze some of the common strategies that wine businesses are using currently, sometimes at great expense to themselves, in order to try and claw a larger market share. Then we're going to outline some really easy to use signifiers of overall business health. And we'll look at a few case studies, and we'll follow those case studies up with some practical steps to take in order for your business to be able to steer clear of some quite unhelpful business habits that are seemingly worryingly commonplace. Now, to help us on our way, we have an absolutely fantastic panel, which includes Olaf Weidemann, who is the Vinimark Head of Insights and Business Advisory. And then we have Francois Rotenbach, who's an independent wine consultant. And we have Divan van Wyk, who's the macro liquor sales senior wine buyer. Now, today's conversation is going to center almost exclusively on the domestic market. But I want to kick off the conversation by asking Olaf to give us a quick snapshot of a broader context. So we're going to look at the global markets and the issues that we are grappling with at home and how they play out in that broader context. So Olaf, every time I look at social media, someone tells me that Gen Z doesn't drink alcohol and that the wine industry has failed to capture the imagination of the youth. But then I look at another study published in 2023 in the American market that says that Americans on average across the entire rather large country are drinking more than they did 30 years ago. So I wondered if you could help us cut through all this speculation with some good old hard data that gives us insight into what the actual global trends are within the wine market.
Morning, Jono. Yeah, so look, unfortunately, global wine consumption is down a little bit it's around 2002 levels. If we look at the slide in the background as well, so the blue bars is the consumption per year on a global level in volume terms. But what I also want to focus on is the black line that's going downwards. That's the area under vine. So yes, consumption is down. It might also be a case of producers are focusing more on what they're good at and what they want to produce. So there's no real way to spin that positively, unfortunately. But I also want to touch on the premium side of it. So the silver lining is that in the States, the premium wine segment, which is $12 a bottle and up, is gaining share of the category. That being said, it's still down in volume terms, but at least people in the premium wine segment are not moving out as much as in the more economical segment. So the US remains the largest market still. It's only growing consumption by about 0.2% from 2015 to 2022. So we can call that flat, basically. That's not really growth. What I also want to touch on is the Gen Z side of things. So I can't help but smile. There are a couple of shocking facts that people like to throw around on social media. I think we have to view it in context with other data sets as well. So the big one that a lot of people are quoting is 45% of Gen Zers say they've never had a drink of alcohol. The interesting thing is 36% of millennials say the same thing. Now, firstly, that gap between the millennials and the Gen Z, 36 to 45%, is actually quite small. I would have expected it to be a lot bigger. Secondly, what we tend to forget is that millennials encompasses people up to the age of 43 years old, while the youngest Gen Zer is 14 years old currently. So let's assume the study was focused on people over the age of 21 who's allowed to drink in the States. Then we're looking at people between 21 and 28 years old. So you're looking at quite a small band of people in any case to be drawing really solid conclusions. And if I look at my personal circle, I think I would struggle to find a 43-year-old who has never had a single drink of alcohol. So that being said, Gen Zers do tend to be a little bit more conscious of their impact on the environment, on society, etc. So it doesn't really shock me that they don't consume alcohol the way previous generations did. But what is important to note as well is around market research and asking consumers questions. So there's an old saying in the market research industry, when you ask someone a question, there's three different ways they can answer it. The first way is who they want to be. The second way is who they want you to think they are. And finally, who they really are. So in short, it means when looking at a consumer's responses, don't take it at face value, but also don't throw it away, because it does highlight a very, very important trend. It talks towards the aspirational side of things. So whether someone's answering a question in terms of who they want to be, that's also a very valuable insight. So if you can tap into who consumers want to be and aspire to be and find a way to capitalize on that market, that's great. The problem with consumers is always they cannot, they struggle to verbalize exactly what they want, especially when we're talking about new products. So yeah, look, it's still a valuable insight to know that Gen Zers say that they're drinking less alcohol.
So you said the American market in large is down. Have you looked at any of the other global markets? I'm thinking in particular, I know that there's been quite a lot of movement in China and in India. Is there anything there that reflects a similar thing? We always seem to reference the American market, and I'm wondering even if that is culturally relevant to us. Or do we most closely mimic the American market, or is in fact the UK market or something like that?
No, spot on. So China is down as well. The three worst countries that are down in volume terms is China, Argentina, and France. China is obviously the worst by far, but France is a close second, actually. To keep in mind on China, I think with the recent political changes, we've got to keep in mind as well where this data comes from. So there might have been embargoes placed on producers supplying to China, like we know with Russia, there might have been as well. So we have to take that into account as well, that what we're seeing might not be the reality. Although I know that China is making a move towards planting their own vineyards, but it'll be a couple of years before they can really cover what they've lost with the Australian exports.
Right. And then I guess my next question would be, still sticking just globally, is we've been talking about alcohol, and are these stats that you've been sharing linked specifically to wine?
Yes, it's all wine-based, yeah.
Okay, so taking that global picture, which isn't rosy, to be fair, with the exception that there is a hint of premiumization going on, which I think South Africa can definitely benefit from. How has the South African market performed over those same time spans in relation to a market like America, for example?
Yeah, so Narit, we can go to the next slide and just one more. So look, if we look at the last 5 years, we try to look at up to the end of December 2019, just to give us an idea of the impact of COVID and the likes. If we look at volume sales, it's grown significantly by just under 10% in the off-consumption market. It covers, let's say, 60 to 80% of the market as a whole. So it's a good proxy to have a look at the total market. So top line, it looks great in volume terms. If we go to the next one, however, we can see when we break out the bag-in-box and Tetra Pak and can sales on the next slide, then there's a little bit of crack starting to appear. So the bottom section, that maroon, is 750 ml glass sales in volume terms, and the gray one, the big block, that is basically everything else, but the largest part of that is bag-in-box. So bag-in-box is growing at about 13%. Year on year from 2019, so phenomenal growth coming from there. It's starting to plateau a little bit, but we have to talk about bag-in-box, we should be thanking the bag-in-box brands who's showing this growth. They are definitely not stealing drinkers from 750 ml glass downwards. If we look at those absolute volume growth, it's not coming from glass wine. So what they're doing is they're bringing in new alcohol consumers into the wine category. And that's essentially what we want. So whether they're coming from beer or fabs, flavored alcoholic beverages, is irrelevant at this stage. At least they're in the wine category. It's now up to all the other brands in the spectrum to trade them up and hold them at least in the wine category. So I think we should thank the bag-in-box brands. They've done the wine category a favor. It's now up to us to trade them upwards. We have to keep reminding ourselves, however, that South Africa is a beer drinking nation. I mean, the biggest beer brand, Black Label, it's about 3 times the size of the wine category in itself. So we have to keep that in mind. It is a beer drinking nation, but it's also great for us. It just means that there's so much white space and so much untapped potential on that side. If we focus on the 750ml glass segment on the next slide as well, it is under a lot more pressure. So it's down by about 0.1% year on year from 2019 in volume terms. So it's not a great thing. And if we just look at the top brands, what is also a little bit concerning, everyone knows that the wine category has a hell of a lot of brands in it, well over 1,100 brands. The top 22 brands, now when we look at total wine market, account for about 80% of the volume sales. Out of 1,120, 22 of them, 80% of the sales. And they're also the ones growing at 8%. The other 1,100 brands accounting for the bottom 20% of the sales are declining by about 3%. So that's a bit of a worrying trend. The fact that the top brands are doing very well, but the longer tail end is not doing so well, unfortunately. In summary, though, the South African market is performing slightly better than global trends, but I would be, if we focus a little bit more just on South Africa, I'd be a little bit more concerned about the 750ml glass segment.
Well, I wanted to ask you, you said we've got a lot of hard work to do to convert those new alcohol drinkers, which is really a promising sign, to, I guess, climb up the quality chain, or at least the value perception chain. Sometimes quality is no better in glass. But my question would be, is there any evidence that that mechanism is already at play? Do we have any studies to show movement up that scale from box wine, for example, into glass? Was that not something you have access to right now?
It's a tricky one to answer definitively, but I would say if we look at the Tetra Packs, which is the 1 liter boxes, it's probably the next logical step for a, let's say, a 5 liter bag and box drinker, is to move to something like that just because of the price point. What we are seeing, however, is in that 750ml glass segment, the 50 to 80 rand and even 80 to 100 rand segment, it's really struggling, that missing middle. And it is a massive segment. We can't ignore it. It's the big commercial brands that the retailers all want on their shelves. So unfortunately, we're not seeing that move up yet. They haven't moved from 5 liter sweet bag and box to 750ml glass, paying 80 rand for a bottle. We also have to keep in mind, of course, the consumer's journey. If they're starting with a sweet wine, they're not going to move to a heavy cab in 2 years' time. We have to kind of take them along the journey, move over from sweet maybe to red, and then kind of gently trade them up.
So, I mean, in one sense, that is a bit of a tragedy in that you really need that stepping stone, right? But any entrepreneur will see a tragedy as an opportunity. And one might imagine that when it comes to product development, there is some work to be done there and some profit to be made. In that specifically, you said 50 to 80 rand, am I correct?
Well, I'll be careful about that. Look, it's a massively saturated market. And the brands that are doing the top brands are doing well, but it's that longer tail that's struggling. So by no means am I saying we should all go and make an 80 rand bottle of Merlot and it's going to do well. It's the case of the brands that tend to do well in that segment are the focused ones, the ones who kind of know what they're about, and they have a very focused strategy for those products. And even though they might have more premium offerings in their stable as well, they remain focused and honest about what that 80 rand bottle of wine does for them.
Yeah. Well, I think the big upside out of that top 22 brands making 80% is this, that most of those brands who are in the top 22, they have someone like you on staff full-time, and they are actually able to combine the sentiment, feel, and message of a brand with really smart data-based decisions. So that's why I'm excited for today's chat. Now, I want to turn the conversation to Divan for a bit from Macro. Now, Divan, you're responsible for wine buying for a fairly large retailer, Macro. I wanted to just check in with you to see whether Olaf's insights reflect your sales figures at macro, or whether perhaps your specific business is telling a slightly different story.
Right. Yeah. Once again, thanks for the opportunity. So yeah, what Olaf just mentioned, we can clearly see exactly the same picture with bag and box growing. If I look a bit more short term, also can-wise, there's also massive growth. If I look at 750 ml, it is a bit compressed at the moment. We are seeing some growth in the premiumization bracket. However, it's not making up for that heavily compressed bracket, like Olaf mentioned, that between 80 and 100 Rand. But with what Olaf just mentioned, that is like pretty much copy and paste with what we're seeing in the business.
So talk to me about I mean, I just want to go off script a little bit. Talk to me about canned wines, because we've been following this trend. I mean, in the Vinimark webinars, we must have talked about canned wines 4 or 5 times in the last 2 years, trying to understand this trend, if it's a trend at all. And all of the reports are a percentage-based sales figure. Like canned wine has grown by 90%, but off what? Off, 10 cases. So there's never any concrete sales data put out there. So when you say canned wine is a growing trend, as macro, are you going into your retail spaces and going, okay, we need to expand the space for canned wine? Are you that confident in the trend?
It's a difficult one, because if we look or analyze the canned wine space, I mean, at the moment it's pretty much dominated by one specific brand. But if you look at that consumer that's purchasing it, I think from a wine perspective, it's actually bringing more consumers into the category. I don't think it's taking any wine sales from a specific brand. Personally, I feel it's coming from the AFB and cider sector. So in the broader scheme of things, I think it's actually bringing consumers into the wine category, and we should take advantage of it. And yeah, obviously with that, the question is there opportunity now for more brands to invest in cans? And if you look at probably the younger generation that is buying the cans, the answer is probably yes. I think there is opportunity to grow the wine sector through canned wines. The question is, what is it going to do maybe then in the bigger scheme of things on sparkling, especially your entry level sparkling. But as I said, I think it's actually bringing new consumer into the category, not necessarily cannibalizing sales from the wine category.
Yes. So Olaf, I think you have a comment that you just wanted to stay there to Divan.
Yeah, I agree with Divan that the canned wine is definitely, it's massive, it's exploding. I mean, we can all be honest, Shadow of Array is the brand we're talking about. I agree with Divan. I think it's bringing a lot of new consumers in. I would just challenge brands. I think the jury's still out whether it's a canned thing, or whether it's a price point thing, or whether it's an occasion. I personally believe it's an occasion. That the product makes perfect sense. We've heard that it gets mixed with other alcoholic beverages. So I think the brands was really going to do their homework on this one. If you look at Shadow of the Array and the product makeup and everything, the technical side of it, it's not the traditional canned wine. So I think there needs to be a lot of homework done around this before we go into it.
No, that's great insight. Thank you. So Divan, just back to you. We were talking, you were saying on a kind of macro level, the stats are pretty similar to what Olaf was saying. I just wanted you to drill down a little bit and tell us what that sales map looks like in South Africa, talking about regional markets. Are there some that are performing better than others?
So if I look at currently our wine sales, we've got to remember 60% of sales happens actually in Gauteng. So that's the bulk chunk of sales within the retail space. However, there's certain brands that's performing better in KwaZulu-Natal or Western Capes. For me, I'd say the opportunity, if I look at specific regions, short-term view, it looks like Free State. There's a bit of quite a bit of a spike in terms of sales from that specific region, but they are coming from a smaller base. However, if we look at maybe from a premiumization perspective, there's massive opportunity if you look at Polokwane as well as the Mpumalanga area. We've seen some phenomenal growth in the Mpumalanga area, and I think that is the next. That's probably going to be the second biggest region in a couple of years' time if they continue on the growth trend they're currently on.
So just to clarify that, you said premiumization is showing strong promise in Limpopo. Well, you said Polokwane specifically.
Correct.
Can you tell us just a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So if I look obviously with Mpumalanga, you've got the Kruger National, so I suppose it's a lot of tourists in the area that's helping or promoting the sale of wine in that specific area. But if I look at specific wines and price bracket growth, there's phenomenal growth in the 200 Rand plus bracket coming specifically from the Mpumalanga and Polokwane region. Yes, they're also fairly big in bag and box, but the phenomenal growth is coming from that premiumization price brackets.
So, and you were saying, I mean, yeah, so Mpumalanga, you're saying is kind of number one for the most improved regional market.
Correct.
So in your mind, when you sit there trying to make sense of this, because obviously you're going to look at these stats and you're going to go, okay, if this is happening already, what do we need to do more of to capitalize on that? I'd want to direct that question at you for producers who are listening in on this and going, well, we have a network in Mpumalanga, or we are already in Polokwane, where should they be putting their focus in order to really make the most of what seems to be a fairly elastic market?
Look, at the moment, I think, obviously, like I said, Gauteng is 60% of the sales, so we can't ignore Gauteng. Sure. I mean, that's going to be the big chunk of your sales. But you can't ignore the growth that's coming from regional provinces like Mpumalanga, which I mentioned. So in terms of growth opportunity, that's definitely going to come from neighboring provinces. And like I said, Mpumalanga is definitely one of them, to invest a little bit more in terms of marketing, getting your product out, and getting the ranging right in that specific area, in those specific regions.
Okay. So I wanted to turn a little bit the conversation, change it to the talking about discounting, because we're talking about getting market share, wanting to grow our brand in the area. And I know that Macro makes fairly regular use of discounts and promotions in your sales strategy. You visit the Macro website at any one moment, there are hundreds of promotions and sales. Can you give me a sort of elevator pitch as to why you think discounting to wine producers is a good idea? Why would you try and get them to do that in particular?
So from a retail side, I mean, the first thing I'm going to say to you, look, obviously it creates that spike. Now, that's something that I'm sure someone like Olaf is not going to enjoy hearing, but it does create a bit of a spike in terms of sales. And if I say sales, you can probably see a spike up between 30 and 40%. So that's the first point. We also have to consider where the South African consumers at the moment. I mean, the money is tight, and consumers are out there looking for a bargain. At the end of the day, we've got to remember the consumers. At the end of the day, he's the boss. And our motto, like as a retailer, is we've got to save we've got to save the consumer money so that they can live better. So unfortunately, we do tend to lean towards putting certain products on a discount to get that saving to the consumer so they can live better. It might be 20 Rand. It doesn't sound a lot, but for some consumers, that 20 Rand is a taxi fare from point A to point B. That's number two with what I'll highlight for the producers. We also have to remember, when a consumer buys something on discount, put yourself in that position. It's like it creates a bit of a talkability. It's a sense of pride. I got this product at price X. I'm prepared to pay 200 Rand, but it's now, say, 180 Rand. And you get some sort of pride that you bought now a product of 180 Rand that's generally in the market for, say, 200 Rand. And then with that also being said, like I mentioned earlier, the consumer is under pressure. And with that, there's certain products that's seen as aspirational products. When we tend to lean towards discounts, we're making it affordable for certain customers to actually now afford a specific product because of them being so tight-strapped.
Yeah. So when you, obviously you have some of the wine companies that you represent or that you have on your shelves. Some of them are going to be far more open to discounting than others, right? And you, in your mind, you probably have an idea of who the guys who are most amenable to that. My question to you would be, do you see long-term trends whereby the brands that discount the most see strongest sales in your stores? Is there a correlation between regular discounting and long-term investment by your consumers? Would you say that's a clear trend or not necessarily?
It is, but what we also have to remember is, if you look at those 22 brands that Olaf mentioned earlier, I mean, 75% of consumers, they know what price that product should be on the shelf for. And if you look at the retail space, I can walk out of our office now and go buy a specific brand. It's going to be on promotion somewhere. So you create that price perception in the market, and it's actually not the price for that specific market. It's just unfortunate because of the retailers. It's driven down to a specific price point that is now like a common price for a product on an everyday basis.
So there does seem to be a link though between brands that discount and brands that garner long-term customer loyalty.
Correct, yes.
So I'm going to turn it to Olaf now, and obviously coming from a slightly different angle. I've sat through a couple of your presentations on sales strategies, Olaf, and I've been interested to hear your take on it. It's obviously a slightly different perspective. Do you think you can outline your concerns surrounding discounting as a sales strategy?
Yeah, so I think I have to preface by saying I'm by no means a sales expert, but my concern with discounting is normally a murkiness around the why are we doing it. And I think broadly speaking, we can put the why into two separate buckets. The one can be, as Diva mentioned, a pure sales spike. So we did it last year. We want to do it again so we can see that spike again. The other one, which I'm a fan of, is making the product more accessible for new consumers to try, what Diva touched on as well. So if a consumer, what we also have to realize, most consumers have made the decision about how much they're going to spend on wine before they walked into the store. So if they've made up their mind that I'm going to spend 80 bucks on a bottle of wine, they're not even going to look at the shelf that's 100 rand and up. But if you could position your product and look, it's normally 100 rand, it's now 80 rand, try it. That's great. If that's the goal, to get new consumers in. The problem comes when, while the sales spike is nice, we have to realize that at some stage, and Divan also spoke to it, we start to train the consumer that the product is actually worth 80 rand and not 100 rand. And from personal anecdotes, I've heard from my friends saying when they buy a bottle of wine that's normally 100 rand but now 80 rand, they kind of get upset when it's 100 rand again, because then they're saying, well, someone's just making a lot more money out of me here. And it devalues your product as well, which is the worst thing for me. From a winemaker's side, I can't imagine what a winemaker would think if consumers start to say, look, your product is actually worth 20% less. It's not as good as you think it is. So that's the concern for me, is the damage it can do to brand over time. And obviously the brand positioning is very difficult by putting the promo lever too much. But what is the worst place to be in for me as a wine brand would be if you become a commodity. Commodity, it sounds very nice. It sounds great to be a commodity, but you have to remember then we're put in the same bucket as sugar and rice and nappies. And I don't think anyone can tell me that they've bought laundry detergent at its full price or Nescafe Gold at its full price. That's the area you're moving into, is that people, like Divan said, they know your price. And if you can go into any one of the big 4 retailer chains at any point in time, and that product is on promo, it does become an issue, because then 80 rand is your new price, not 100 rand. So that's my biggest concern with the discounting strategy, is not being clear on the why.
So can you just outline, because I think you said something quite important there, which I don't think is going to be immediately obvious to everyone, when you said at some point you are going to become a commodity. For a small wine brand who's producing a bespoke range of wines, why do they not want to be a commodity? Explain what that means.
Well, Ivan's on the call and we have a good relationship, I would like to think. But if you become a commodity, then there is a lot more pressure from the retailers to participate in the big events, whether that be on the big expensive broadsheets, your promo reliance goes up a little bit, so you sell more on promotion. And it's more a problem of if that's your positioning, you're a commodity, then I'd be concerned. If, like Ivan alluded to, if it's an aspirational brand and you somehow manage to remain separated from the commodity and the hard commercial side of it, that's great. It's a difficult one to say no to though, because at that time when Divan asks for another promotional slot, it's a lot of sales. By no means am I discounting that side of it. So it's a very difficult thing to say no to, but from a brand health perspective over the long term, it can become quite a slippery slope.
Okay. So you said at the beginning, Olaf, that discounting does have a place. For you personally, you feel that place is for the introduction of or new customers to your brand. Is that correct?
That's correct. I'm sure every salesperson will disagree with me and say it's a very useful sales spike as well. But the problem is a sales spike is 1 week or 1 month. Then next year we have to do it again because we did it last year, February, so now we have to repeat it. And then we become so reliant on that. The other problem is promoting too much, not in terms of percentage-wise, but promoting for 4 weeks or 6 weeks at a time. What's the point of that? Because now everyone's pantry loading. You've got all the shoppers in the first week, and you're just stealing sales from the next 3 weeks. So I'm by no means against promoting, but like you said, you've got to have a very specific strategy in mind, and very detailed in terms of how long, how deep. Am I going to promote somewhere else as well? It doesn't help you're on Black Friday and all the major retailers, because then everyone's buying your product at a discount, and the retailer on the flip side isn't getting the uplift they want to see as well. So it doesn't help any of the two parties.
So as someone who appreciates data, and we have acknowledged seemingly from all sides that discounting does lead to a massive spike in sales. Would you say there's merit in using discounting in order to gather data from a larger market source or to just engage with more customers?
Definitely. That's a great point. So there's definitely room for that from a data side and from a research side, because you, like Divan said, now you understand, if I do a 10% price drop, what kind of uplift am I going to see? If we go to the next slide, we can see that we might have taken a little bit too far. So globally, or at least amongst the countries read, South Africa is the 4th most elastic alcohol market. That's not a good thing. We don't want to be in the top 5 on this. What that 2.9 number means that with every 1% increase in regular price, an average brand can expect about a 2.9% drop in unit sales if no one else takes a price increase as well. So I'm talking a lot about the negative of discounting, but this is just one of the factors we have to keep in mind, is that when we promote too often and too deep, this number goes up even further. And it's not a good thing, because now that your promotional strategy is starting to attack your regular price, which it shouldn't, that should be two separate conversations. I think I've gone off on a bit of a tangent there, Jono, but
No, not at all.
Question.
I just wanted you to, I wanted you to repeat that one stat again. You said for every % that your price goes up. Can you repeat that? I didn't quite catch that. Sorry.
For every 1% your price goes up, you'll see a drop of about 2.9% in unit sales. That is if no one else makes a price increase as well. So and obviously this is saying, what are they going to say? Ceteris paribus. If everything else remains the same, that's the impact.
Okay. So you've clearly thought a lot about this. And I was interested to hear you say in one of your last presentations that you can actually look at your discounting strategies and use those as a metric of business health. Now, can you expand a little bit on how my decision as a wine producer to discount for 4 weeks or 6 weeks is going to somehow communicate the health or lack of my business? Can you unpack that?
Sure. There's, I mean, this could be a whole another webinar on its own, which I'm sure will bore people, but there's a lot of different metrics we can look at when we talk about promotion. The quickest one is obviously uplift. What if we look at the next slide, what I like to look at is to plot the products or the brands on kind of let's call it a brand health chart. So if we were to look at on the left-hand side axis, you would have your total unit sales growth. And on the horizontal axis, you would have your promotional unit sales growth. So the best place to be is in that top left quadrant. That is where your total unit sales growth is growing, but you're becoming less reliant on promo. So your promo sales is actually declining. But if you can decline promo sales, and I think Devin can agree with me, if a brand can decline their promo sales, but still grow their total sales, that's a phenomenal place to be in. To be fair, only about 18% of South African alcohol brands are getting that right. They're in the healthy area. If we move clockwise along the side, the top right-hand quadrant, those brands are ones that are promo driven. So they are seeing total unit growth, but the promotional side of things is growing faster. Then it becomes a little bit uncomfortable for some sales managers, because now it's a case of, well, you're actually just growing because you're promoting more. And then obviously, if we move further along the curve, you can become promo reliant and eventually squeezed, where everything is down. So this is a very nice and visual way to plot your products or your brands. It's just one of numerous promotional metrics we can look into.
And I suppose the nice thing to flip this on its head is in one sense, the converse of that commodity or commodification is, if you're managing to grow your sales without any sort of discount, then you know that it is quality of the product or the sentiment of the brand that is doing all the hard work. And so in some senses, what I love about this graph is that it really outlines the financial value of brand building and quality, which, you know, sometimes when we talk about sales growth, we talk about marketing and message and discounting and promotions, but sometimes it's about quality and focus, which perhaps we can talk about more a little bit later.
Yeah.
So I wanted to use this kind of platform then to switch over to Francois. And Francois, thanks for giving your time to join us today. Can we see your face yet or not? Still not.
Yeah,
but you are there.
Yeah.
You like,
absolutely.
Oh, there we go. There's that face. I thought you were going to be like Darkwing Duck for a short time, but it's nice to see you. So, I mean, Francois, you have spent ages working in the really premium end of the wine market with your work at Singita, and you service a lot of high net worth individuals in your work, and I wanted to find out what role discounting plays in this sector, if any.
Well, outright discounting, I'm completely against, because I come from an industry which is high in tourism, where protecting the rack rate, in other words, protecting the brand, is of critical importance. However, I'm fully supportive of what Ulf was talking about, because that is a technique that we've utilized ourselves, but also in terms of other areas, and that is to use opportunities to learn and experience, and in that way develop the understanding, education, and ultimately brand loyalty. So if there's promotional use to ensure listings or to make more wine available, to promote it for the experiential side of things, then in this area that I've been operating in, it's very much a significant benefit. So instead of racing to the bottom, in this case, it's about exposing people in an educational way. Very interesting research I was reading in the week of people today having the highest percentage of comfortability with the concept of wine, because they can jump onto Google or any other smartphone application and pick up something, yet one of the lowest levels of comfortability with what it is and what it all means. In other words, there's a significant gap between people knowing what wine is, yet understanding what it is. And I think in that area, there's where if we circle back to the theme of the webinar, is that is it a case of people falling out of love, or is it a case that we can do a lot more? There's an opportunity here to really expose younger people to what wine is and what it all associates with. And I think we'll unpack that as we go along. But I think there's a huge opportunities in that space. So the key element in the space that we've operated in is that whether it is mature guests or whether it is young guests, both Gen Z and millennials, it relates to far more in terms of the association with the wine and all the components that go with it, community, sustainability, etc. And that all gets linked into the choice of having wine rather than the commoditization. So I would be fully supportive of what Olaf's speaking about. The commoditization wine gets a very negative view when it comes to that level of the market.
So did I understand you correctly? Then you said you make use of discounting. Were you saying that there would have been times in your previous businesses where you would have said to a producer, if you give us a discount off your product, we will show that product in a platform that will, as you said, first of all, protect and grow your brand. Is that what you were saying? Not quite. Rather to make promotional stock available. Okay. So in the space I've been operating at, it's perhaps less viable, but we've utilized it to showcase the wines a lot more. So when I mean less viable, that is outright discounting. But to say, if you list the wine, if you take X number of bottles, we will provide Y number of bottles for promotional use. And therefore, you've got free access to the wine to show the guests, allow them to taste it, explain to them the story, why the wine exists, who the people are behind the brand, who's growing it in the vineyard, etc. That's very powerful. Yeah. Because what they're seeing is they're seeing the caliber of the brand, and they are experiencing it as a generous opportunity to learn about it. So there's no association with the bottom end of the market, or even that you may be struggling to move sales are down and you now discounting it to promote it. This is more about using an opportunity to showcase and educate. That's fantastic. I think you highlighted an interesting point where we're talking about promotion, not necessarily as a chance to pass on an artificial level of value to the consumer, but rather you're using promotion in the context of a trusted retail partner to grow brand equity or brand value. And that's very much, that's very much what I will chat to you a little bit later on in terms of authenticity of the brands. Is becoming more and more a focus point. So the storyline, a lot of people are talking now about you've got to tell stories. But if that story is not perceived as being authentic, if you scratch the surface and it's not solid below, it's not resonating at all. In fact, it's then seen in extremely negative light. So help me with that, because I think we talk about authenticity quite a lot. And I know that Helen de Kock gave a great talk about how important authenticity is in a wine brand. But I mean, what would be obviously an anonymized example of a brand demonstrating that they aren't authentic? They put forward a message, something happens, and then that image is broken. Can you give as I say, an anonymized example of that sort of thing? I'd much rather chat about ones that are authentic, but well, I mean, the reason I ask the question in the negative is because I do think everyone goes, authenticity is good. We got to be authentic. Let's try and be authentic. No one is arguing with that point. Yet some succeed and others fail. And I think sometimes by seeing the failures, you realize, I didn't even realize that was unhelpful. Yep. No, you 100%. So, for example, regenerative is now a word that's being utilized. It's sort of almost supplanting sustainability as the word du jour. And you're starting to see more and more wine producers putting that into their sentences, etc. And a very good example is quite a prestigious crossover property between Stellenbosch and Franschhoek,
where they are speaking on their website, on their newsletters of regenerative, but the photograph has got a huge big tractor in it. So what young people immediately say is, you speaking of regeneration, shouldn't you be having animals in your photographs, which is related to, instead of monoculture, having multiple things living and growing on your property, and not having a huge big diesel chewing tractor using fossil fuels. So it can literally go right down to that kind of base messaging. People are more and more visual in terms of how they consume their media. And it's a little thing in the back of your head. So if you've got a photograph of your brand that you're utilizing, and it's actually showing individuals on the farm operating with the environment around them, that's going to be a lot more authentic than it is of having this huge big tractor.
Yeah, and I guess what you're talking about is the consumer is beginning to pay more attention to the details.
Significantly, and it relates to the questions, because in our space, operating at the high end of the market, these are questions that are coming up every single time you are in conversation. The typical ones were, in the past, were there was always a question related about closures, and then there was a question about organics. And so as far back as 20 years ago, questions of organics came up every conversation. Now it's gone far beyond that. And the questions now relate to, what is the producer doing to make a difference on their area and in their surrounding areas? So it's a case of, can we restore? It's not even a case of trying to sustain. And, you know, discounting, there's no resonance between discounting and that.
Yes, I hear you. So, I mean, I feel like you rightly brought us back to the theme of the webinar, which is, has the world fallen out of love with wine? And we've made that mistake of talking about wine as if it's a single thing. And what's been coming out of this conversation so far is that there are sectors in the market, right? We talked about in South Africa, bag and box, it's growing. There is strength there, but then there's a gap in the next sort of category up. But then in one context where discounting might be highly unhelpful, a slight tweak of that model where the benefit is not increased sales, but increased brand strength, has the potential for great benefit. So we can see there are very clearly different strategies for different tiers, different conditions, different results. So Olaf, I wanted to come back to you because, again, listening to one of your talks, you spoke a lot about positional marketing. And I just wanted to give you a little bit of a gap to unpack that and see if that's not helpful for producers to actually put together what all three of you guys have been talking about up until this point.
So I did not coin the phrase positional marketing. I don't know what the official definition is, but the way I look at it is, if you had 3 seconds with a shopper or consumer or a buyer, what would your sales pitch be? Effectively, what's your elevator pitch? Is it because it's the best red blend ever? Is it the cheapest Sauvignon Blanc? Is it the best Chardonnay from the Elgin region? And I'm going to go back to my bugbear. If the positioning is it's the cheapest Sauvignon Blanc in a bottle, we have to be very clear that that's a position you cannot defend. Anyone can bring in a cheaper bottle of wine than you in 1 month's time. They might be losing money on it, firstly, so we have to stop making the assumption that everyone is making margin on all their products. That's why it's a nice basket to have a big range of products. You can lose a little bit of money on this one, make more on your premium end to support the bottom end. So we have to stop making that assumption. And whether they're losing money or using poorer quality juice, it's no longer relevant whether your product is better than theirs or not, because you've chosen to position yourselves as the cheapest. Then you have to remain the cheapest. So it's a very, very difficult, it's impossible to defend, actually. And it's a very, I don't know why a brand would want to be in that place anyway. Why would you want to couple yourself with the word cheapest or most affordable? So in terms of new products, we prefer to take a demand-side approach. So as difficult as it is, trying to listen to consumers in terms of what they want next. And that in itself is a dark science that I don't want to get into. But if we do go the supply side, if a brand does say, look, we have this product, we want to sell it, the first question, the most difficult question to answer probably is from the winemakers, to say to them, which of your competitors or your colleagues do you see your bottle of wine next to on a shelf? So are you competing with a Chocolate Block? Are you competing with a Mielis Rubicon? And then we start there, and then you work back to a price. Because if you're positioning yourself on shelf next to that position product, we're going to assume that the winemaker has the intrinsics, the taste, the quality, everything in place already to fight or to complement that product. So that's normally where we start. We ask the winemaker, okay, who do you see it next to? Because if you think it's 200 Rand worth, then probably everyone else will as well. So that's normally the first thing we ask, although it doesn't really always come that easily. And then again, why, if you're creating a brilliant Stellenbosch cab, why sell it for 90 bucks? If it should only be appreciated in 5 years' time, remember, the people who pay 90 Rand for a bottle of wine most likely want to drink it tonight or this weekend. They don't want to wait for 5 years. So again, it's just going back to that. Why are you doing this? Firstly, are you doing this because your neighbor has a nice block of Chardonnay and you don't want to let go to waste? Because that's not a good, it's not a good enough reason to bring another new product into the market. And speaking to what Francois spoke about as well, that authenticity, I definitely can't say when someone is authentic or what makes someone authentic or not, but it's very obvious when it is. And if that story is right, that's great. If it resonates with the buyer as well, like a divan, that's phenomenal. I'm not saying there isn't a place for a cheap bottle of Sauvignon Blanc, but if that's your unique selling position, then I'd be a little bit concerned.
Right. So when you're bringing a new product out, as we said earlier, you can't just focus on packaging, you can't just focus on quality, and you can't just focus on price point, right? Those need to all work together, and they need to be coherent, which also links into authenticity a little bit. And I guess maybe what it highlights is a lot of people do think that, is that, okay, well, here's the market, I'm going to make a product that's just as good as that, but 10% cheaper. It's quite a short-term position to take. So as you said for someone launching a new product, you ask them, well, who do you see it next to on the shelf? Okay. How do they go about even figuring that out? Because, I mean, that's not immediately obvious.
Yeah, well, that's kind of the underlying issue, is that why did you make the wine in the first place? Did you make it because you have the juice available? If it's a supply side, if it's a supply side decision, then I have an issue with it already, because now you're force fitting it into something that there might not be a gap for it. But if you have a Francois coming to you and saying, look, the resort really want a 500 bottle of cab that speaks to Stellenbosch, that's great, but that's demand side driven. So, but I know that the winemakers aren't going to like to hear it, but it should be demand side, not supply side necessarily. If that answers the question.
Yeah, no, I mean, it totally does. But I think it also highlights, perhaps when you said, why are you making this bottle of wine? It really seems to require the need for a level of creativity. It's the desire to put something out into the world that says something. And perhaps when you say, well, it's just because we've got the juice, you don't have anything to say. And I don't want to get too esoteric or philosophical, but perhaps the kind of first point of positional marketing is understanding what is it that you are wanting to say with this little baby product of yours that you're wanting to grow. And perhaps the next would be, well, who are the people who are going to be most receptive to that message? But maybe we're going into the realm of philosophy here, so I'll turn back. But Francois, I wanted to come back to you because I think we are coming back to the importance of brand. And really this question of, has the world fallen out of love? The more and more you guys are talking, the more and more it seems that perhaps the world is falling out of love with like the anonymous. And you were talking about commodity, Olaf, where actually it's just something that it's there, it can be squeezed, there's, price points can be squeezed. There's no stickability, there's no reason why the customer would remember it, and therefore why the customer would pay more for it. So perhaps the answer that seems to be emerging is that the customer is falling out of love with people who have nothing to say. Now, I wanted to, when in the context of wine, Francois, again, you have worked with some of the most prestigious and aspirational brands that are making wine in South Africa. Can you perhaps talk a little bit about the key denominators, the common denominators with these brands? And I'd like to preface this by saying that I don't think this answer is going to appeal only to the top tier. I think whether you're no matter what price bracket you're in, I think there are some universal qualities to brand building. Anyway, can you tell us your thoughts?
Just to back up my own experiences, I've spoke to our youngest son, who has just taken on a position at a second prestigious Stellenbosch cellar door, and he is smack bang in the Gen Z area, and I was chatting to him about his experiences, but I'm going to circle back to that in a moment. I first want to put something that may seem a little controversial, but when I grew up, my grandfather was a whiskey drinker, being Scottish. And he taught me all about whiskey. And he used to drink blended whiskey during the week. And then on very high days and holidays, he'd have a single malt. And in that time, what whiskey discovered is that their market share was shrinking at quite an alarming rate as the Second World War generation started to pass away. And I think that there's maybe something to think about going into the future, and that is what happened with whiskey that decoupled the commoditization of blended whiskey from aspirational. So it's still the same category of whiskey, but single malts and specialized bottlings, rarities, things like that. There are many people in the world who pretty much would argue they've never had a blended whiskey in their lives before. They've only ever had specialist product. And I'm starting to think more and more that we should consider decoupling this concept of this ladder effect of going from bag-in-box sweet wines all the way up to serious Cabernet, to use Olaf's example in the beginning, because I'm not sure that that's going to resonate with the new generations. I think we need to, within the concept of wine, as it was done with whiskey, and to a large extent, one of the long-term dying categories was white spirits, and look what's happened with the craft phenomena. To the point where even accommodating the no-low alcohol groupings where you've got gins which don't have alcohol. So to circle back to wine, our experience with top-end tourism and conservation work is that there are different levels, but there is interest right down to the young. But it is in the, to use a word, the authenticity space. So the wine has to be directly coupled to a very good story that relates not just to its site where it comes from, but also the people involved and the general environment. Is this an unusual environment? And that, again, doesn't necessarily have to be super high end in terms of price. It can be that this little valley is quite unusual because of this X, Y, and Z. That's definitely a factor. But that story needs to be appealing. It needs to have a distinct human element, and a rarity value is of particular importance. So it doesn't necessarily have to be rarity value in terms of price. It could also be relatively small production because of whatever these environmental factors or people factors are. Very important. What's interesting is when I spoke to our son about this, is his cellar door experience. He's come from two properties where they have extremely good stories in this space. One has got Old Vine Project wines, and in fact, both of them have, and the other is got an incredible reputation in the red wine space. But what he's saying is that the young people coming, 18 to 25 is the ages he was talking about, they weren't interested in tasting the commodity wine or the bottom, let's call it the entry level from those properties. They wanted to only focus in on what made this particular product unique and special, and what could they tell their friends, and it related to the story of it. These old vines that were really well cared for, kept alive for all these years. There's an unusualness about the taste, and they always wanted to focus in on really high quality. That's the core drive. So not drinking alcohol for the volume point of view, but rather as a special occasion. So spending more, but then having it for that special opportunity. And I think that's where that decoupling idea could very much be something where one starts to, if you are producing both, that you completely split your marketing. You don't try and associate the two, but you rather have streamlined and focused marketing in terms of the two areas that you're operating in. Although I would generally suggest that you focus in on the one or the other.
So when you say the one or the other, you're referring to
commodity space. So, the bag in box and things like that. I wouldn't be surprised if we start to see that sort of 80 Rand bottle of wine could slowly disappear. That it's literally not put in the bottle anymore. And certainly if we look at in the Scandinavian countries where the growth of bag in box has been quite sustained over a long period of time. I mean, their campaigns were specifically focused on imagery on the boxes to indicate that this is the same as that bottle of wine. And what's interesting is the feedback coming through on that side is that more and more people are selecting the bag in box, even when the price is line priced with the bottle, because their feeling is that it's more sustainable to have that single bag in box than multiple bottles, multiple closures, etc.
Okay. So I like what you said about essentially instead of having a rather old school sense that people will climb a spending ladder from low to high, you want to kind of dismantle that and actually say, well, people don't have to climb that ladder if you give them value in a story, in information, in an experience. And you used gin as an example. Would you not say, and maybe I'm a little bit skeptical, but it feels like gin's revival, the craft gin thing, revolved largely around garish or over-the-top packaging, and the processes behind it often remained the same. I mean, so I'm wondering, if wine just changed its packaging dramatically, why wouldn't we see the same result that we saw with gin? I mean, what if maybe I've missed? I understand that there are small production gin distilleries, but I don't see how the actual core changed. It felt like the packaging changed, but the core products remain similar.
It's a very smart question. But in terms of operating in a different space, experience within the space we're operated in is a case of the craft gin phenomena, and it didn't have to be craft gin. It could be of the super premium brands, but it related to gathering people together around the bar and creating these drinks together. So no longer a case of the barman at a distance or the barista at a distance making things unseen, unheard, etc. Now it's a case of whether it's coffee culture, whether it's gin, whether it's wine, to have this as a communal, shared educational experience. And then you've got that opportunity of education because, wow, that ingredient I never would have thought could make the gin pop like it has. And in terms of wine, from direct experience, and I'm talking hundreds and hundreds of tastings with these guests, it's all about a situation of, at that level, people not wanting to be embarrassed by having to ask a silly question. And there are no silly questions. And wine, let's be honest with ourselves, is a pretty complex business. There's almost no way that you can answer a question in a single sentence with anything related to wine. There's always context. You've got to contextualize the answer every single time. And when it starts sounding like you are teaching somebody in a classroom fashion, everybody switches off. Whereas if you are doing an experiential thing, you're tasting the wine, you're chatting through why does the texture do this in your mouth? In terms of the gin, why are you adding this little ingredient into the glass? And if you don't add it, somehow it's not the same. I mean, it's the classic thing of if you don't put the salt and pepper in when you're cooking, you're not going to get the flavor to pop. And the concept of you don't need to ask the price or whether this is good because it's an iconic brand coming back from hundreds of years ago. That's not resonating any longer. It's now more about this is an iconic estate and look what they're doing to restore the farmland and the natural spaces around the farmland and the vineyards. There's more interest in that and how classic brands are reinventing themselves. And if one looks particularly in Europe, I mean, let's face it, Bordeaux has had some horrendous scientific feedback on how much damage has been done over hundreds of years of copper sulfate and all the rest of it. So what is the storyline that's coming out of Burgundy and Bordeaux today is all about organics and biodynamics, because it's about trying to help people to understand that we can also do good, not just do bad. And so that decoupling from the race to the bottom component of commodity, which may end up proving to be of a generation that is slowly going to start passing away, as was that Second World War whiskey generation. And potentially, by decoupling it in that direct sense, you can do both things at the same time.
I mean, that's a fascinating insight. And this is the field that I find most interesting, is trying to unpack those stories. But Devon, I want to come back to you again, because I'd be interested to hear what you think that answer would look like in the context of macro and your sales figures. I'd be interested to see if your biggest sellers rely on storytelling as well, or whether it is a different set of qualities.
Look, storytelling does definitely help in terms of sales, but that's a handful of products. If you look again, unfortunately, at the commoditized products, it's not that. It's the perceived value of a specific product that you've got on the shelf, and that's what's really driving the product up our shelves. I think the producers, we alluded on it a little bit earlier on, it's got to decide, do you want to put a product on retail shelf and become a commoditized product, or do you want to sell less, maybe a better quality type of product? I mean, I think you said it earlier on, you need to decide, do you want to be positioned next to a chocolate block or a Rubicon? I think all of you mentioned that's the questions you ask the producers, and then you work back from there. But yeah, if your answer is that you're going to be a commoditized product, like our discussions on the discounts earlier on, then it is going to be a bit cutthroat business for you. And it's going to be all the retailers that's going to fight for every cent for the consumer at the end of the day. And yeah, we're not shy in making profit, but at the end of the day, all of us want this consumer to save some money. And I think that's the biggest question that the producers got to ask is, how big do I want the brand to become? If you're going to be a commoditized product, then probably discounts is going to play a massive role within your product.
You also do, Macro does have a premium end to its liquor sales department. So do you see those brands behaving in the same way? Are they also very happy to discount regularly? I mean, because you also said perceived value. Now, perceived value, I mean, those are all sealed containers on the shelf, right? So perceived value is already including brand value plus what's inside the bottle. So what would you say are the common denominators of the brands that are succeeding? Surely not only the ones that discount the most.
I think if you look at the premium products, again, I said it earlier on, I mean, you are generally then probably an aspirational product for the masses in terms of consumers. If you look at more premium products, yeah, we do discount it a lot less, and you've got less activity around the product in terms of promotional broadsheets. But there's more aspects to that product that sells it. I mean, it's in-store specialists that you've got to sell the product, and that's when the storytelling becomes a big plus point. I mean, to sell a story of how the specific product is, how long since when the specific or a vineyard was planted, or when was the farm built, that type of thing. I mean, all of that adds to the excitement for the person that sells the bottle in the store, as well as to the consumer that's buying the product. And I'm pretty sure that the information that gets passed on to the consumer, he goes to a braai obviously, or hopefully enjoys a bottle of wine, but that story gets transferred to the friends. So I think from a premiumization perspective, storytelling has got a big influence in terms of sales. And for that specific market, that really helps.
And so what I want to do now, because I know we're already over time, but sometimes when the chat demands it, you've got to push on a little bit. I just wanted to know if there's anyone on the panel, so Olaf, Divan, Francois, you've been listening to your counterparts talk. Have there been questions that have popped up in your mind that you perhaps wanted to ask to one another? And at the same time, for those of you guys who are listening at home, we're going to be checking now for any questions that might have come in during the course of the webinar that perhaps we can answer before we finish off.
I suppose I'll be the first one, and Olaf, it's going to come to you. Is I suppose in the ideal world, my question to you is: would you discount?
Is it my brand? Am I the farm owner? Then no, I wouldn't. No, look, I can answer one of the Q&As that came up that's aimed at me, I think, where someone said, when you go online to the producer sites, they regularly discount their own products on their own sites. What are your thoughts on this? So I purposefully resisted the temptation to go check online now if I could find out which producer it is, because I want to remain diplomatic about it. But I also don't know the context of that. Is it a case of it's a wine club discount? Is it a loyalty drive, etc.? If it's a straight 20% off on their website, I would question that. If a consumer has gone through all the effort to go to your website already, they've already actually made up their mind that they want your product, or at least they want to visit your estate. You can only stuff it up at that stage. If your website, like Francois mentioned, if your website isn't authentic, then you've lost them. You don't need to discount 20%. You've already got them. If, however, it's in a macro wood meat or a spa, let's talk about a small top spa even, with the selection on the shelf, then a discount does make sense if you want to stand out a little bit. But again, why are you doing it? Is it to make it more accessible? Is it to stand out for your competition? So the long way of saying it, I don't know the context, but it doesn't really make sense to me the way they've done it. The other thing I wanted to touch on earlier is if it's to reward loyal consumers, there's a lot of other ways of doing that. If you look at Divan on the call, for example, everyone that goes into macro has to scan their card. So Divan knows exactly who you are, how much you bought it. So if you can go to Divan and say, look, show me the top 100 customers or top 10 customers that have bought the most wine. Obviously, we just want to make sure it's not restaurants, the individual customers, and send them a case of something. Because you're rewarding a loyal customer. Otherwise, it's a shotgun approach. Then everyone is getting 20% off. And if you're a new consumer, if I'm buying it for the first time, you've anchored my price in my mind. Your bottle of wine is 80 Rand worth, not 100 bucks, because I paid 80 Rand for the first time. Now into perpetuity, you have to convince me that it's 100 Rand. So it's, yeah, to answer the question, I don't agree with that approach. No, not necessarily.
So are there any comments to that? No, because we do have some questions. We have one from one Evan Alexander for Francois that says, what is your opinion on hybrid grape varieties that have been developed to be disease or drought resistant? Could these fill the commodity space, leaving other varieties at the higher end?
I think that there is potential there, but there's also very easy to confuse the market. So it's going to have to be very carefully managed. I mean, Rubinay is a grape variety that was developed some time back and has been used quite extensively in large volume space. But if you try and explain to the average consumer what that's all about, it creates enormous confusion. I mean, Pinotage alone has not been exactly the easiest thing to help people to understand. So I think you've got to be a little careful. If it's a new grape varieties that are being developed to create easier farming in changing climatic conditions, even the Bordelais have had to start changing their laws to accommodate these kind of things. So that may very well work. I think what you must not then do is confuse the specialized end of the market with introducing that thing. What's much more effective there is to talk about varieties that are being trialed in the country, mother blocks, etc., of other countries where they would be very hot or arid conditions, etc. Something that springs to mind, obviously, is work being done with Acertico and others, where they've already got a proven track record of doing well, and it's whether they will do well here in the same space. So there's potential, and what's working at the moment is that's generating interest in that individualized purchase space. So not for the commodity space, but to introduce those kind of varieties from the volume end and maybe manage your costs better in that commodity space makes a lot of sense. I just wouldn't talk about it too much.
Okay, so then we have another question from Johan Buerta, who says, with this massive competition in the 80 Rand to 100 Rand price bracket, anyone can answer this. What would you do to get the consumer to pick your brand off the shelf? There's more than 200 wines in that bracket.
I think I'll have a stag at this one, John. But at the end of the day, I suppose for me, it's okay. At least a consumer is buying a 80 to 100 Rand product. So at the end of the day, look, I'm getting the sale. But if you as a producer want to get your product selling in that 80 to 100 Rand bracket, and there's like 200 competitors, that's where I think our wine consultants plays a massive role. And again, that's when storytelling becomes a massive role. Is taking information that you'd like to get passed on to the consumer, pass it on to the sales staff that's actually selling the product in whether it's in a macro or other retailer. But that is the person that ultimately interacts with your consumer before he puts it into his basket, is really trying to get that story over to the consumer via the consultant in the store.
Absolutely. Well, we are now way over time, so I'm gonna try and really recap it, because I think there's quite a rich, there's been a tapestry of themes here, which I think are hugely useful, as we said earlier, for smaller businesses or bigger businesses who perhaps haven't considered some of the intricacies of these topics. So we started out asking, has the world fallen out of love with wine? And Ulof said, well, look, I mean, looking at the big markets, looking globally, yeah, there has been a decline in consumption of wine specifically. But he then said, let's not panic too much about Gen Z, because actually a lot of those statistics, or first of all, may or may not include people over drinking age, but actually the gap is quite small. And we'll see later why that gap is actually even smaller. He then said in South Africa, there has been growth, but a lot of that growth has been down at the bottom end of the market, bag and box. And in some senses, we need to thank that end of the market for doing the hard work. But the question is now, will those consumers progress into other areas of the sales ladder? And we asked Devon the same question, and you're saying, yes, macro sees exactly the same thing. Some of his interesting points were that actually canned wine is a meaningful category for that, it is growing. And again, he made the point that this canned wine is not cannibalizing other areas of wine, it's actually bringing in new customers, people who are interacting with wine in a new way. So this is a little section of hope that is worth looking into, worth exploring, and it does tie into themes of sustainability and alternative packaging. And he also went on to just give us a little map where we've got Gauteng really is 60% of all sales locally, but there are these really interesting little markets in places like Limpopo, or in Polokwane specifically, also in Mpumalanga, where there seems to be massive growth. And also, for instance, in Polokwane, premium growth is really an interesting area. He talked about discounts, and I asked him, is this really a viable solution for producers who are wanting to grow their market share? And he said discounts always bring in a cash spike, and there does seem to be a sustainability to it. Now, of course, I moved that across to Ulof back in data, saying, like, is this what you see? And while he wasn't against it, what he did say is, ask yourself, why are you discounting? So you need to really understand the purpose of discounting. And he would say, perhaps to introduce yourself to new customers, But then if you're going to do that, make sure that there's some feedback to get the data so that you are understanding these new customers that you're interacting with. And Francois, then we jumped to the kind of more premium end, and Francois gave this fascinating insight that don't necessarily look at discounting or promotion as just giving value in the form of currency to the end user, but instead look at it as a way of buying some brand equity by partnering with retailers who can present your brand in the context it needs to be. So perhaps you do take a financial knock, but it's not so that the consumer gets your products for cheaper, but rather that the retailer has more equity or motivation to work with your product and communicate as it should be. So that's a wonderful flip on the promotion, is that actually the retailer is getting a win, which means they're motivated to present your product in a better way. And we also talked about brand protection and product positioning. And these are incredibly important to understand. I think Olaf talked about, you need to ask yourself not only, why you are discounting, take a few steps back and ask, why did you create this product? What are you wanting to do? If it's just because you had the juice, well, then you may need to really think creatively about how you make sure that your product is not anonymous. And I think it's safe to say, is the world falling out of love with wine? No. Francois and his son both had these senses and these experiences and these anecdotes that people are fascinated, but they're fascinated by details, engagement, stories, authenticity. So if you have a product that you can't even sell in an elevator in 30 seconds, you are probably going to struggle to maintain that brand value and sell those products, even if you are desperately promoting. And so at the end, it's perhaps not falling out of love with wine, but rather it's falling out of love with people or products that have nothing to say. So I feel like hopefully we've done some good work. Oh, one last thing is that for every business who is deciding to discount or promote, you really need to look at your business, your books at the end of the year and ask yourself, what did those promotions do to your brand value and to your GP? Because if your discounting just dropped your GP drastically, that is something that you need to be aware of. And if you found a way to use it to strengthen your brand, then you have to ask, should I not be investing more directly in brand strength if that's where the success comes? So thank you guys for all your time today. Olaf, Divan, Francois, you guys have been amazing. I'm really excited again, as I said, to have more chats with you in the future. Francois, I look forward to seeing the insights that come with your consulting. And Olaf, I look forward to your next masterclass where you really unpack these things so beautifully for producers to just understand better, not merely how to develop a product, but actually to get it to market successfully. And Divan, it was so good of you to share your insights, to tell us what a really powerful retailer is doing around the country and how producers can interact with you better. So for those of you at home who enjoyed the webinar, don't forget that these actually get recorded and put onto YouTube for you to be able to watch. And you can find links to that both on YouTube and on the Vinimark website. And we also have podcasts where I do one-on-one conversations with similar inspiring minds like the panel before you today. And we talk about some of the things like wine science, seller mastery, marketing, business trends that actually make our wine industry that we love so much a much richer tapestry and more interesting place to be. Thank you for joining us, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.